The following program is produced and sponsored by you, the TBN partners, and is only made possible through your generous support.
Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program is Smoking Guns and Magic Bullets, Part 2. The reason for Part 2 is that in the last program, there was so much information, there were so many smoking guns that devastated evolutionary theory that there wasn't time to get all that you need to have. Now, understanding that not everyone who's watching the program today saw the last program, I'm going to need to repeat just a bit, but I'll do that as rapidly as possible so I can then get to new information that you need. Smoking Guns and Magic Bullets, Part 2. It is necessary, in order for us to understand the issues, it's necessary for us to define the terms, and those terms have to do with evolutionary theory. According to the standard evolutionary theory, there has been a macroevolutionary transformation. What do they mean by that? From inorganic compounds, from rocks, to living cells, to complicated combinations in living systems, to progression, ultimately producing man, molecule to man, or rock to man. That's macroevolution. Now, that has never been observed, cannot be repeated. All experiments that have been done by the tens of thousands have never even suggested a possibility of that occurring. Some time ago, I wrote a book that's still in print, Why Do Men Believe Evolution Against All Odds? And in this book, I cite technical references where the scholars, the biochemists and microbiologists themselves, have stated that not only do they not know how inorganic compounds, rocks, basic chemistry, chemical elements, not only do they not know how the rocks produced a living cell, they admit that they can't even imagine how it could have happened. So macroevolution is in serious jeopardy. That is a smoking gun, but we'll get to that later. But now, when we talk about microevolution, there's no problem with that. Microevolution is evolution within genetic boundary. That is, where the information was already in place, there is a reshuffling of that information, normally degrading that information. That's microevolution, and that is no problem whatsoever. So defining our terms, what we're really pointing the smoking guns at is macroevolution, the standard evolutionary theory of molecules to man. All right, that theory is expressed in the Tower of Time, where it's imagined that about 3.5 billion years ago, early bacteria evolved, and then from that we have living systems that have ever increasingly evolved until we finally end up with man, the ultimate. We have the Paleozoic era, the Mesozoic era, the Cenozoic era. So thus we have this envision. In the last program, I stated to you, and I need to restate, that this geologic column, this Tower of Time, is not found anywhere on the face of the globe except in the mind of the evolutionist, assigning living systems to primitive, intermediate, and ultimate, progressed, sophisticated living systems. Yet, in the technical literature, there's an admission that even so-called simple cells are incredibly complicated. There's no such thing as a simple cell. For instance, this is a smoking gun. Follow this. A single cell is so complicated, it has the DNA that must have all the information not only for that cell, but to subdivide into other cells which will be assigned other placements within the living organism. So the DNA must encompass all the information in a single cell, all the information of the whole organism. That's a smoking gun for evolutionary theory. Let's go beyond the DNA. Let's just take the proteins themselves. There are 60,000 proteins in every cell. You have 100 trillion cells in your body. You have 100 billion cells in your brain. You have 100 trillion cells, and each one of those is specific. They never get mixed up. In fact, if they are mixed up, then it's a disease problem. But under normal conditions, they don't get mixed up. I often say, aren't you glad the proteins and the cells structuring the eyelashes do not get mixed up with the proteins and the cells structuring for the toenails? Wouldn't you hate to have eyelashes on your toenails? Put it another way, wouldn't you hate to have toenails on your eyelashes? Aren't you glad they don't get mixed up? But back to the main concept. Just the proteins themselves. In every cell, you have 100 trillion cells in your body. In every cell, you have 60,000 specific proteins in 100 different specific configurations. In the technical literature, it's admitted that the odds just for the proteins, those 60,000 proteins, each specific, to assemble, self-assemble naturalistically by evolutionary means, and they have to assemble very fast, because if they're not assembled in a very short time, minutes and at the most hours, they begin to biodegrade. For those 60,000 proteins to self-assemble in 100 different specific configurations, the odds that this could happen by evolutionary means is 1 chance in 10 to the 4,478,296th power. Any statistician would admit that anything beyond 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power has 0 chance of occurring. This is a smoking gun that destroys the very abiogenesis, the arrival of living systems from non-living systems, or the progression of living systems from another form of a living system. It has to all be done essentially immediately, or it won't work at all. So we have a major problem, smoking gun with the living systems interpreted by evolutionary theory. In the last program I mentioned that there's another major problem. It's polystrate fossils. Fossils that interlate all of these geologic layers. Now, I cannot overemphasize the truth of this. Throughout all of these layers, from the Paleozoic, throughout all of the epochs, periods, eras, all the way through the supposed geologic column, even though they're found in topsy-turvy form, they're interlaced with fossils that connect the two together as if they were all laid down during a worldwide flood. In fact, that brings us to the next smoking gun, and I talked about this in the last program, and that is the Cretaceous white layer, very hard, called the Cretaceous Austin chalk, because it was first described in the technical literature among geologists near Austin, Texas. But that layer runs from Austin, 1,600 miles to the eastern seaboard of the United States, picks up again at the White Cliffs of Dover, runs throughout Europe, runs throughout Russia, throughout China, throughout Israel, where it is now demonstrated and photographed, runs throughout Africa. From Texas, it runs west all the way to the west coast, runs north throughout Canada, runs south throughout Central and South America, picks up again in Australia. It is a worldwide sedimentary layer. Sedimentary layer has to be laid down by water that is in an active mode, meaning that this smoking gun declares there was a worldwide flood. That is a smoking gun for evolutionary theory. In the last program, I mentioned that astrophysicists and astronomers simply state that the stars have been formed over these 20 billion years of evolutionary time. But let's look at the math and see if that too is a smoking gun. Astronomers conservatively estimate that there are 100 billion galaxies, each comprised of 200 billion stars. Astronomers claim, simply make the claim, and they have made tremendous observations in space. They then claim that the universe is 200 billion years old. Now that's a claim. They have counted many of the galaxies, they've counted many of the stars, then they make the claim that the universe is 200 billion years old. That is, let's divide the universe into seconds. We get 6 times 3, 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power of seconds in 20 billion years. Let's do the math. If we have 100 billion galaxies times 200 billion stars each, that comes to the figure of 2 times 10 to the 22nd power, divided by the number of seconds, that's 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power, and that gives us 3.746 times 10 to the 4, or 31,746 stars per second would have to form in all of those 20 billion years, including observations today. We've never seen even one star form, and we have seen them die. Genesis 1:16 states, just He made the stars also. Here we have a beautiful sweep of God's activity. What evolution cannot perform, God has performed. Then in the last program, I'll mention briefly what we talked about. That is carbon-14 that is normally used in the public journal records to illustrate time and evolution. In 5,700 years, carbon-14 loses half its mass. But here is an incredible bit of data that has now been confirmed in a major laboratory. We have too much carbon-14 in deep geologic strata. Carbon-14 is generated artificially as ultraviolet radiation strikes nitrogen in the upper atmosphere. Carbon-12, carbon-14 are the carbon-12, carbon-13 are the normal carbon atoms, but carbon-14 is added when ultraviolet radiation strikes the upper atmosphere, strikes nitrogen, carbon-14 is generated. It's radioactive. In 5,700 years, it loses half its mass. In another 5,700 years, it loses half that mass. In 7 half-lives, it's all gone, meaning that in a few tens of thousands of years, even at face value, it would all be gone. However, we have the following fact. Conventional carbon-14 laboratories have been aware of an anomaly, a problem, a smoking gun, if you will, since the early 1980s. They've striven to eliminate this problem, but are unable to account for it. Lately, the world's best such laboratory, which has learned during the 2 decades of low carbon-14 measurements how not to contaminate the specimens externally. They have confirmed such observations for cold sampling and even a dozen diamonds which cannot be contaminated, that carbon-14 is there, meaning that the outside age of the entire system is only at max a few tens of thousands of years, and when appropriately interpreted with a canopy above the earth, only a few thousand years. Smoking guns that destroy, lay flat, horizontal evolutionary theory. But now let's get some new smoking guns. It has to do with the formation of proteins themselves, proteins in all living systems. Now, I said earlier that proteins, there are 60,000 proteins in 100 different configurations in every single cell. These proteins are absolutely necessary. I want to ask you, how religious is evolutionary theory? Is there a smoking gun involved, or are we talking about real science? Let's grant for a moment that 20 billion years of time the evolutionist needs to assemble a single protein. Now, a single protein. Remember, we're not just talking about a single protein. There's 60,000 proteins in 100 different configurations in every single cell of your body, and you have 100 trillion cells. You have 100 billion cells in your brain. But let's grant the evolutionist his day, but let's see if it really pans out. Let's grant 20 billion years to assemble a single protein, but proteins are specific. A single protein's not enough. Oh, well, forget that for the moment. Let's just talk about a single protein. In 20 billion years, you have this figure, 20 billion times 365 days times 24 hours times 60 minutes times 60 seconds. So in 20 billion years, you have 630, 720, 000, 000 seconds to assemble one short protein through random, undirected shuffling, evolutionary naturalism. We need to make the following calculations. 1, all of these zeros. All of these zeros. All of these zeros. All of these. All of these. All of these divided by the seconds in these 20 billion years, and that gives us 1 times 5/8 and all of those numbers times 10 to the 243 random changes per second to achieve the correct order in less than 20 billion years. Now, written out and rounded off, that's the following. 15,854, all of these zeros, 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 all of these, and all of these, random shuffles per second for 20 billion years. Then we must assemble 60,000 unique proteins for each cell. In other words, protein simulation, protein structure, protein formation is a smoking gun for evolutionary theory. Now let's come to the final major smoking gun, which is at the same time a magic bullet for creation concept. It solves the problem. It remedies the non-consistent logic. Let's talk about your brain. The human brain. The human mind and the human brain as an entity are absolutely incredible. The mind of man uniquely can measure the distance to the farthest star, weigh the mass of the universe, interpret the music and the signals in the symphony of the composite universe on a grand scale. Only man can do that. Your brain is incredible. Let me tell you something about you. You have 100 trillion cells in your body. You have 100 billion cells in your brain. Every second of your life, your brain receives, processes, and transmits over 100 million signals. Every second, over 100 million signals. It runs the operation of the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, which tells you when to breathe, the eyelashes to move, the eyes to blink, to cleanse the eyes of intrusion. All of those things happen as the brain tells the body how to function. It monitors the temperature, the environment. In fact, in a book that I published some years ago, I was amazed at the data when I researched this. In Scientific American, a neurologist published that as a result of his research, he had found that the human brain observes contexts anticipates problems, works out solution, provides a course of action, and instructs the body to follow with that course of action, all without the conscious person realizing there was a problem at all. An incredible smoking gun for evolutionary theory, but a magic bullet for the creation model, solving the problem and leveling the playing field. Let me tell you more about your brain. In Against All Odds, I give the technical references where it's been found that if you learn something new every second of your life and assimilated that in your brain with what you already know, and that happens automatically in that beautifully designed brain, automatically your dream system assimilates what you've learned with what's already in store. That's the reason you get some of the weird dreams and fanciful concepts that have nothing to do with reality. It's just assimilating all of that together. So now, if your brain learns something new every second of your life and assimilated that with what you already know, it would take you over 3 million years to use up your brain capacity. This is cited in Against All Odds. It would take you over 3 million years to use up your brain capacity. Now, this is a smoking gun, because if evolution designed us, and we were designed to go on for, maybe 100, 110, 118, 120 years on planet Earth, why then did evolution design for us a brain that could go on 3 million years without using up its brain capacity if we learn something new every second of our life? But I have news for you. The smoking gun is more powerful than that. You see, we don't learn something new every second of our lives. In the course of 24 hours, we think about 10,000 concepts. That's about 1/4 of the potential. The rest of the time, we're out to recess. That's our favorite subject, recess. I mean, we golf, and I'm for golfing. We fish, I'm for fishing. We just do something we enjoy where we don't have to learn much that's new. In fact, when I golf, I don't learn much that's new. I make the same old mistakes most of the time. So on a practical basis, we think about 10,000 concepts in a 24-hour period. The rest of the time, we're out to recess. And so we have to multiply on a practical basis that 3 million years times 4, which gives us 12 million years to use up our brain capacity on a practical basis. 12 million years. That's a smoking gun for evolutionary theory. But then I realized that the technical literature also demonstrates that during fetal development, we produce 200 billion brain cells. Why then did we end up with only half of what we produced? Because basically, in the 3rd trimester, due to lack of oxygen supply, we lose that tremendous proliferation of additional brain cells. Millions of brain cells are provided daily. New brain cells, all potential to make us super geniuses. Yet, we lose them because of lack of oxygen. But now to the magic bullet. While this is a smoking gun, horizontally laying out evolutionary theory as the explanation for the human brain, there's a magic bullet that gets to the heart of the problem and solves it and answers it all. And it's the evolutionary, it's the creation model as opposed to the evolutionary model. Watch closely. In the world before the flood, the diameter of the earth was slightly smaller, so the gravitational attraction would have pulled on the atmospheric gases and doubled the atmospheric pressure or at sea level. Now that's marvelous. At Texas A&M University, they found that if you double the atmospheric pressure, you triple the assimilation of available oxygen. That is marvelous. That means that the dinosaur problem is solved. This is a magic bullet for the dinosaur question. The dinosaurs had small lungs. How could they get around on planet Earth when some of them weighed, like Seismosaurus, just under 200,000 pounds? That solves the problem because the oxygen would have been assimilated in the deep cell tissue under 2 atmospheres of pressure. But it also solves the problem of the human brain. The smoking gun for evolution becomes a magic bullet for creation because in that world before the flood with slightly enriched oxygen with 2 atmospheres of pressure, the deep cell tissue of the body would have been saturated with oxygen. That means that during fetal development of the brain, you wouldn't lose all of those brain cells. You would retain all 200 billion brain cells, each with its 50,000 neuron connections to other brain cells. I had a mathematician calculate this for me, and he found that if you factor in the 50,000 additional neuron connections for every additional 100 billion brain cells, that means that we would be able to go on using our capacity for 10 billion quadrillion years. It's over 1 billion times longer than the most avid evolutionists suggest the stars of the universe will shine. And then a publishing neurologist found that each of those neuron connections has the computing power of a desktop computer. That means that your brain was designed to go on forever, forever and forever. And your brain has brought you now in direct confrontation with the Creator. In the person of His Son, Jesus Christ, who died, was buried, and rose again, is knocking at your heart's door. Wouldn't you simply pray this prayer? Dear God, I'm a sinner. I want your Son to step into my heart. Lord Jesus, come in right now. I open my heart to you. Cover me with your blood. Save me forever. And I will serve you with all my heart. Welcome to truth.
Creation in the 21st Century has been sponsored by Trinity Broadcasting Network. And only with your love gift of support can this program stay on the air. So write to Creation in the 21st Century, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.
Information like you've received today is available